Welcome to week 9 of SWK 700, Human Behavior in the Social Environment. This week's topic is multicultural social work. The concepts in this screencast are from Malcolm Payne's Modern Social Work Theory, specifically from Chapter 14, Anti-Oppressive and Multicultural Sensitivity Approaches to Practice. This is your professor, Dr. Yvonne Ruiz, and welcome to this screencast. So let's start with why anti-oppression and multicultural sensitivity is important for us as practitioners. This may seem obvious. I hope it's obvious to you, but let's go through these 4 points. Anti-oppressive and multicultural sensitivity approaches to practice help practitioners understand the importance of culture, race, and ethnicity. This is something that is foundational for our work as social workers, understanding who our clients are from a person and environment perspective, their cultural identity, their race and ethnicity, and how these have shaped their life experiences and opportunities are important for us to understand and have a sense of how these have impacted our client. Understand the client's individual and social identities. This is referring to the fact that we all have a personal sense of identity. There are many factors that contribute to this: who we are, where we live, what we like, our family context, as well as a social identity that is often defined by others. What social group are we seen as being a part of? Who are we identified with by others? What are those stereotypes and experiences of discrimination that our social group identity is impacted by? Also, how we respond to the oppression that exists in our society by those who hold power and who are part of the dominant group in our society. So how we respond to our clients' feelings, experiences, and impact of being oppressed by social or personal identity. And finally, how we respond to cultural, racial, and ethnic differences. How comfortable are we as practitioners working with clients who may be different in some way from our own lived experience? We need to explore this and have a self-awareness about ourselves as being part of a culture, as being identified with a racial group, and our own experience of ethnicity. So the chapter reviews several concepts and theories. The first concept is that of multiculturalism and multicultural sensitivity. So what this term means is that it acknowledges and affirms that there is cultural, racial, and ethnic diversity. So the focus is on having a sense of cultural competence, on working with clients from different cultural groups and who hold various cultural identities. And the main point of multiculturalism is that it values and celebrates the diversity of cultural contributions in our society. I want to add that multiculturalism has been critiqued because while it seems like a good thing, and it seems like celebrating diversity is a good thing, the critique is that it doesn't go far enough in distinguishing the ways that different cultural, racial, and ethnic groups in our society are impacted by experiences of power and oppression. So multiculturalism has been seen as an example of, having a potluck dinner and, where people bring a variety of dishes from their ethnic origins. So that's a good thing, and sharing and celebrating. But what about the experiences of people who have been harmed or have been discriminated or marginalized by their cultural identity? Multiculturalism doesn't really address this. The main content in the chapter is on anti-oppressive social work theory. We're going to go a little bit more into this in later slides, but for now, let's look at what this theory is. It's the systematic study of oppression, which means that it doesn't only focus on individual experience, but it looks at the systemic barriers in our society that contribute and add to the oppression that some groups in our society experience. It challenges the structure of society and the use of power in the aim of maintaining some groups in a position of inferiority. The focus is on populations whose voices are silent, who have less access to resources, and who have been excluded and disconnected from the social, political, and economic life, and from full participation and gaining benefits from those in our society. An anti-oppressive practice refers to the development of strategies that help our clients to deal with and overcome oppression and to promote self-determination, self-expression, and equity in social relationships. Anti-discriminatory practice is the main strategy in combating discrimination. So it's about action that's taken to prevent discrimination on a wide variety of social identities related to class, socioeconomic status, related to race, gender, disability, among others. Immigration status can be added there, religious and religious affiliation, among others that we can probably think of. So it takes into account how we behave towards other individuals as well as other groups, but it focuses a lot on how an individual experiences being discriminated against because of membership in a particular social group. So basically this looks at workplaces as well as other types of settings where people may feel they're not being treated fairly. So all employees in our agencies should promote the practice in the workplace. It's key to combating prejudice and working towards eradicating discrimination and promoting equality for all clients, for all practitioners, and for all employees and members of particular social groups. So this is very related to human resources. It's very related to policies as being part of our practice. So I want to make a comment here that multicultural sensitivity and multiculturalism, anti-oppressive practice, anti-discrimination practice, and anti-racism are all very much interconnected, but they do have some particular qualities and particular perspectives that are associated with each. Right now, let's delve a little bit more into anti-oppressive practice. So there are four main points that I'm going to make about anti-oppressive practice. Comes directly from Dalrymple and Berg from 2006. Overcoming barriers to clients achieving greater control of their lives. working in partnership with clients, and including them in decision making. It also aims to use minimal levels of intervention to reduce the impact of oppression by the practitioner and to avoid disempowering our clients and avoids the disempowering aspects of social work practice. And it seeks to use critical reflection and reflexivity to understand how our values as practitioners and how our life experiences affect our relationships with our clients. So some of this should sound familiar. It's very much related to empowerment and empowerment practice. The main point that I want to make here is that the perspective that people are oppressed by systems of power and privilege, by lack of access to resources that impact our life choices and opportunities. And that's what anti-oppressive practice is involved with. So how is oppression maintained? How is it sustained in our society when we can all agree that oppression is negative, has negative effects on people's lives, and is something that creates unequal access to resources in our society? So one is exploitation. This is where one group appropriates the benefits gained by others. And we can see exploitation in action by, for example, undocumented immigrants who are exploited in terms of the types of work that they have access to, the type of workplace conditions, and the type of wages that they're able to earn. Often their labor is exploited and they're not paid, and they're not recognized as having access to benefits. The second one is marginalization, in which individuals or groups are denied participation in social, economic, and political systems. So they're pushed to the edges. Their voices aren't heard. They are marginalized and made to feel devalued and diminished. The third is powerlessness, lacking power to make change, lacking power to access opportunities and to create opportunities. So when one feels powerless, one also feels hopeless. The fourth is cultural imperialism, in which the culture of the dominant group is the norm and sets the standards by which others are measured against, by which other individuals and groups are compared, and often found that their differences are lacking and they're seen as less than or inferior. And the fifth is violence. And violence can be individual and it can be community violence. We've seen a lot of racialized violence. So this is where some groups are subjected to physical and emotional violence, ridicule, harassment, and stigma. For us as social work practitioners, the stigma that many of our clients experience is one of the main ways that oppression can be addressed within our therapeutic relationships, and being able to help empower our clients to deal with, manage, and combat the effects of stigma. So as practitioners, we do not want to reinforce oppression or feelings of being oppressed or feelings of being made to feel devalued in our actual practice. We want to support our clients feeling like they're the experts of their own experience. We want to support the values and perspectives of our clients while also providing a safe place to discuss issues, problems, barriers that they're experiencing in their lives. So there are 4 elements of anti-oppressive practice. One is values practice. So we want to be informed by the beliefs, ideas, and values that our clients hold about themselves and how they experience the environments and context of where they live and how they live. So we need to acknowledge that our clients may hold different values, and that needs to be okay with us. We cannot impose our own values or our own perspectives on how clients should live their lives. The second one is empowerment practice. We've already talked about this as one of the values of social work, to empower our clients to gain greater control over their lives and to increase their capacity to engage with personal, social, and political aspects of their lives, and to gain a sense of voice, being able to make choices, and being able to take advantage of and create opportunities to have greater empowerment in their lives. The third bullet is partnership practice. Aims to achieve an alliance between practitioner and client. Aims to collaborate with other agencies and between interpersonal and among interpersonal practitioners. So collaboration and partnership are important aspects of our practice. And finally, we aim to have a minimal level of intervention because we see our clients as experts in their own lives. We do not want to intrude on the rights and the freedom of our clients to make their own decisions. So how we approach our work, how we approach our clients is always with the understanding that we don't want to reinforce norms, expectations, and practices that may recreate experiences of oppression. We need to acknowledge racism and how racism affects our brown and black clients. So the definition is racism is the individual and systematic manifestation of the uneven distribution of power and prejudice related to culturally defined ideas of race. So we don't see race as a biological difference. We don't see race as having its roots in physical or phenotypal characteristics, but rather race is something that is socially constructed. The idea of who is black, who is brown, and what that means has at its core social roots of inequality, of difference, and of inferiority in our society. So there are 4 different types of racism. They're all interconnected, but we can identify these 4 categories. One is internalized racism. In our society, all of us live with the messages we've received from our families, from society, from authority figures, from politics, economics, and social norms, right? And these get internalized, psychodynamic process. So we internalize beliefs and biases about race and racism. We internalize unconsciously the ways that racialized people are seen in our society. And often these are negative beliefs that we're not always conscious of, but that exist in our private beliefs and our implicit biases. And internalized racism happens to everyone, whether you're white, black, brown, whatever skin color, we live in a racialized society. The next category is interpersonal racism, and this occurs between individuals. You can probably think of many anecdotes, many experiences where you have witnessed racism, been a recipient of racism, and maybe even acted in a racist way, right? So these are biases that occur when individuals interact with others who are different. And this is where our private racial beliefs can impact our public interactions. Again, think about the ways that racism has impacted you. And I'm including white racial identity here. This isn't only about being identified as black or brown, but also what are the ideas about the white social group? What are the ideas about the differences between races? All of these impact our experience of racism. The next is institutional racism. This occurs within institutions and systems of power. So think about schools, think about workplaces, think about agencies, and other community agencies, policies, and practices. And then finally, there's structural racism, and this is political. Think about political institutions. Think about the cumulative and compounding effects of racism on opportunities, access to power, the ways that history, culture, ideology, and interactions of institutions, policies, and politics and economics impact one's life chances, opportunities, and how one is able to live their lives. Right now in our society, we're experiencing more acknowledgement of institutionalized and structuralized racism, I think, than at any time before, certainly in my lived experience. This is not to say it's without controversy. This is not to say that there are a lot of differing perspectives. And certainly we're also seeing a lot of discord, a lot of prejudice, stereotypes, and white supremacy that is occurring in our society. Think of the Proud Boys, think of all of the clashes that have happened, think of the ways that policing is happening in our society right now. As social workers, we need to be able to see these with open eyes, open hearts, and open minds, and understand the impact on our clients. So you may have seen this graphic on social media. This has been a very popular image that's making its way around. So the journey from racism to anti-racism needs to happen on a variety of levels, right? It needs to happen on a personal level, institutional level, community level, needs to happen within our organizations, certainly needs to happen within our social work practitioners and organizations and agencies. So in order to become an anti-racist, the easiest place to start is with personal action. And we need to acknowledge the ways that we fear talking about race, acknowledging race, and being able to discuss racial issues with our colleagues and with our clients. So looking at the fear zone level of becoming anti-racist, we need to acknowledge that it's easy to deny that racism is a problem in our society. I think the past few months are really challenging this notion, but we still hear ideas such as, I belong to the human race, I don't see race, I'm colorblind, everyone is equal. But in fact, a colorblind perspective is actually harmful, because if we don't acknowledge that race has an impact on individuals, and that race is a system of power and privilege and disempowerment and stigma, how can we actually make a difference? So we need to understand that we are called on to act, even when we're afraid, even when we're uncertain and uncomfortable. The next level of becoming an anti-racist is when we're open to learning. We open our hearts and minds, and we recognize that racism is everywhere, and that racism is a personal problem, it's a social problem, it's an economic problem, it's a political problem. So we learn about the ways that our clients feel and perceive and experience their racial identities. And we also explore our own experiences of oppression and privilege. This means that we need to be willing to make ourselves vulnerable. We need to be willing to listen to others, even when we are uncomfortable, even when our own experience is challenged. This is not to mean that I'm reinforcing white guilt, or that one needs to feel a heavy burden for what Black people have experienced, slavery and oppression, but rather that we need to acknowledge our own experiences, and we need to commit ourselves to equity practice. So the third level of becoming an anti-racist is when we're willing to grow, when we acknowledge and identify that we have benefited from racism, that we've benefited from privilege based on skin color. When we become advocates and speak out when we see racism, when we take responsibility to educate others, and we don't let our mistakes, because we are going to make mistakes, we don't let our mistakes hinder us or deter us from taking action. And that we strive to make relationships that are based on equity, and we work towards reflecting on the ways that anti-racism needs to be more widely accepted and acted upon in our profession and in our society. So the key is on taking personal action. So I've mentioned that multiculturalism, anti-discrimination, anti-oppressive, anti-racism are all interconnected, and they're all part of an intersectionality perspective and framework. First introduced by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989, intersectionality is a framework for conceptualizing a person, a group of people, an institution, or a social problem as affected by any number of discriminations and disadvantages, as well as taking into account experiences of privilege and access to resources. So it takes into account people's overlapping identities and experiences. in order to understand the complexity of people's lives, the complexity of oppression, power, and privilege that all of us as individuals face. So I particularly like this chart or this image that Cisneros and his colleagues first introduced in 2008. And it's a web of intersecting identities. And I really like the metaphor of a web. And if you think about a spider web, you think of the ways that it's interconnected. A spider web is not linear, but rather it's intersecting lines, and using that metaphor to display and depict the intersecting identities of individual lives. So this image defines the various factors that contribute towards an individual's personal identity of intersectionality. So at the center, you see power, privilege, and access to resources. So these can be a high level of privilege and power. It can be a low level of privilege and access to resources, as well as it can be mixed. If you think about your own life, I am sure that all of us can think about some privilege that we have. For example, getting a graduate degree is absolutely a measure of privilege, and all of us can think of ways that we're disempowered, ways that we are denied or have limited access to resources. Then, in the circle closest to that core privilege, power, and access to resources, you can see the main aspects of race, of gender, of socioeconomic status, of whether your ethnicity, your language that you speak, your nationality, your citizenship status related to national origin and language, related to your level of ability, right? Your spirituality or religion, your sexual orientation, right? So that closest circle to privilege and power means that if you're white, if you're male, if you have a high level of a socioeconomic status, if you're born in the U.S., if you're able-bodied, if you're Protestant or Catholic, and if you're heterosexual, you have high levels of privilege and power and access to resources. Moving out from that circle, there are various other levels that contribute, various other ways of looking at identity that have varying levels of power and privilege. So, for example, in the socioeconomic slice of the pie, if you're on welfare or public assistance or transitional aid, you have the least amount of socioeconomic status. The next level is the working poor, who are often on the edge and have difficulties with getting those basic needs met. Working class, working socioeconomic status may have more level of privilege and power than those on public assistance and the working poor, but they don't have much. And then middle socioeconomic status, or the middle class. As we know, in our society right now, people are barely hanging on to their middle status. And this is probably the widest level of definition, because people who make less than 250,000 or up to 250,000 are also considered middle class. But there's a big difference, right, between earning $250,000 in household income and earning $75,000 in household income. And then, of course, the highest level is the ruling wealthy, the top 10%, who have the most access to power and privilege. So you can look at each slice of the pie and see where the experiences of power and privilege lie, and the experiences of disempowerment. This is for discussion purposes. We may not agree with ranking or the way these are depicted. We can actually probably think of additional factors that we might want to discuss in our class discussion. But this gives us a starting point to think about intersectional identities. And I want to leave you with a quote by Audre Lorde. There is no such thing as a single issue struggle, because we do not live single issue lives. If you haven't heard of Audre Lorde, I suggest that you Google her name and learn a little bit about this extraordinary woman. So I'm going to leave you here. Thank you for listening so far, and we will have further discussion when we meet in our class. Thank you. Bye.